Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. We are here today with Heath Spencer, who is the CEO of TraitWare. Hey, Heath, how's your day going so far?
It's going great. Glad to be here, Scott.
It's always a pleasure to have you on as a guest. I know you've been a guest before on our show, so welcome again. Heath, for those of you, or for those of us who don't or are not familiar with TraitWare, what can you tell us about TraitWare? Who is TraitWare, and what do you guys do?
Yeah, so TraitWare is an authentication platform that was built, really out of the desire, back when we started the company to just solve our own frustrations with the passwords and how you had to create them, change them, evolve them up over time. And there's a really funny comedy routine by a guy named Michael McIntyre that makes jokes about, like, what do you mean my password's not strong enough? I built it, and then, well, now I got to add these things. And anyway, won't go too far into that. People can go watch it on their own. But we kind of started just with, how do we address the risks and the frustrations associated with passwords, and then how do we use modern technology to really bring modernization to how I access sensitive things. And so we looked around the landscape and said, all these software platforms are using really legacy technologies that could be modernized. Everything, when you look across other industries, almost everything, whether it's from medical space or even just to different things, better tools are out there. Even being a mechanic today, you get the right tool and you can do things a lot faster, right? And so why don't we
Sure.
modernize that? And that's kind of what we set out to do, and we've achieved that. And you've experienced how simple it is to use TraitWare personally and for your business, and really just trying to make it as easy as possible for us as the people that whose lives are difficult enough, and then behind the scenes add a value of security posture
Sure.
to that. And really, what is the still, unfortunately, the number one attack vector that threat actors use to get into places is, through the credentials, right? A shareable secret.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned it just a minute ago. I am a proud user as well in our MSP of TraitWare. How long have we been on the platform? I was thinking it's been 2 or 3 years
So
now, I
yeah, it's
think.
been a while. Yeah, it's been a while, and very minimal support tickets from what I know. Once it's in place and up and running, it just works. It does what it's supposed to, because we've built it to be simple to use and simple to deploy. And when we built the integrations using standards, right? And so by using standards, those are pretty well supported across lots of different industries, and make it easy to be plug and play. And the standards, as they evolve, get better. They don't typically break. So
Awesome. Well, what led you, Heath, to focus specifically on authentication and identity security? Was there a particular moment or experience that shaped TraitWare's mission?
to be honest, I don't think we really recognized when we started down this path of, as I just mentioned, just solving our own personal frustrations with. We came out of a different business that was focused on video analytics security. And we had written some custom software that dealt with facial recognition and movement tracking. And we were in a partnership with a hardware company that was doing video cameras and video surveillance, and addressing the kind of the security problem of key card access. When you have like one person that swipes a key card and then three bodies go through, how do you authenticate if that was okay, or if
Ah,
someone actually needs to pay attention to that? Long story short, we ended up selling that product off to the hardware company, and they package it and bundle it today. And so we had some resource left over and said, okay, either, hey, we all work together well, we either part ways and go do something different, or what do we want to solve today? And
sure.
I think when we first started out, we didn't really grasp, how important solving authentication was going to be. We really set out with, like, that when we started this, biometrics on a mobile device were just being introduced. In fact, they weren't even available on most mobile devices when we first started. And that kind of was like a trigger point of saying, like, well, hey, we already carry this phone around and it's got biometrics on it. How could we, maybe use some of what we've done to write software around uniquely identifying a person using something we're already carrying? And how do we apply that to access control, particularly for workforce identity to get started? And so, as the product evolved and the company evolved, and then figuring out how to make it work across lots of applications, has landed where we're at today. And, little beknownst to us, we didn't know that we were going to be delivering something that was so important for solving what it, like I mentioned just previously, the number one cybersecurity risk today, which is human access control to secure assets.
So really, it kind of started though with the security company and the cameras and all that, like you
It,
said, and people coming in. How do you do multiple people coming in?
yeah, well, yeah, that was our background, right? Like we already
Okay,
had a focus on like how do you authenticate that these same three people go to lunch every day together, and it's okay that only one of the employees swipe their card, and a security guard doesn't need to go check them, right? And then no recognizing patterns in those kinds of things was our background, and kind of led us, the name TraitWare comes from a couple different things. And actually it's, if there's some Star Wars nerds out there, there's an homage to Star Wars. And what's interesting is, and you can go look this up, but it's actually the chip that gave personality to C3PO, right? Was actually called
okay,
TraitWare. But we also viewed it as we all have God-given different trait characteristics,
hmm,
right? We're given different gifts and given different traits, and we're all unique. Even as you mentioned, like we have children. If you have a couple children, you know that even though these children came from the same mom and dad, they are all different, right? And so if you have siblings, you know that you're different than your sibling. And how can we use those things to uniquely identify a person, and then use that to then say, this really is them, we should let them in, without actually having to add any friction to them. Like the technology should be doing that behind the scenes.
very cool. Well, Heath, I've heard you say it over and over. TraitWare often talks about passwordless and relying on no shareable secrets.
Mhm.
Before we get into technical details, how would you describe the concept in simple everyday language?
Yeah, so instead of having a user create a password when they create an account, which if you look at pretty much almost anything, any application that people, whether it's a consumer based or business based application, at account creation, typically a user has to go, provide a username, which a lot of these cases just email, and then they have to go create a password. And then they're asked after the fact, oh, hey, passwords by themselves aren't secure enough. So can you register a second factor? Unfortunately, there's a lot of businesses still using just SMS for that second factor, which is not secure. And I think it's been almost 8 years ago that the government said you should deprecate using SMS because this is too easy to capture. And if you think about that, the methodology of using a password is it's supposed to be a secret. However, if the user knows it at any given point, they can share it either on purpose or possibly inadvertently, right? And
Sure.
in most cases, legacy based MFA, the additional factors, the second factor, what really started as 2FA, two factor authentication,
Right.
in today's world really needs to be multiple factors of authentication. However, in most cases, that also becomes a temporary knowledge factor, right? So if you get sent a number or a code, even if it's only valid for 30 seconds, you need to know what that is and you need to enter it inside of that 30-second window. That just actually adds friction and frustration for users. If you make a mistake typing that number, you got to start all over and all of those things. So moving to passwordless, a trait where we believe that the user shouldn't know the secret at any point. And then if you don't know it, if it's invisible or transparent or unknown, you can't share it on purpose or by accident, right? It's just if it's built into the technology where the technology is doing it invisibly to you, to the user, it does a couple things. It makes it where I don't have to create a password. I don't have to remember it or store it somewhere and then go retrieve it to use it. And then I don't have a temporary knowledge factor, a one-time code that I know in the process when I'm using real passwordless MFA. And the key thing is in today's world is there are a lot of applications that are trying to improve your user experience by giving you a passwordless experience, a passwordless login. But the key understanding or the difference is that's not MFA. So if you use a passkey for some things today, or you use a magic link or something like that, some of those scenarios, it makes it convenient for you as the user because you don't have to enter a password, but it's not really applying multiple factors to that login. And so you do need to, when you're evaluating different solutions, whether it's TraitWare or other solutions, there's a big difference between a passwordless experience and what we would term as phishing resistant multi-factor authentication, meaning that it's passwordless, but it's actual multi-factor authentication, meaning we're using multiple components to authenticate, hey, it really is Scott, and Scott should be allowed to access this application because we can verify it across multiple things, and we don't have to ask Scott to enter something that's a knowledge factor during that process.
Very cool. Well, Heath, you work with several different organizations across different industries. What common challenges do you see them facing when it comes to authentication and account security?
So common challenges are, I mean, for anyone that hasn't deployed a solution like TraitWare or TraitWare yet today, common challenges are managing people's identities, right? Identity creation, trying to prevent corporate identities being used across applications that maybe corporate doesn't know about. So you end up with things like shadow SaaS, where this employee said, "Hey, I need this tool," and they went and signed up for it on their own, on whether it was a corporate credit card or not. And if you don't know that they're using this tool, then you don't know that corporate data could be going out there. So there's those kinds of things. So moving to a centralized identity management platform for maybe a public understanding is like a single sign-on platform where your employees can only access the applications that have been approved by HR or whoever's in charge of that, the IT department, et cetera, the MSP that's managing that for them or helping set that up. And then enforcing multi-factor authentication, because pretty much all the legacy platforms require that to be user responsible, meaning the administrator has to go and say, "Hey, I'm going to create a policy that says you have to use MFA, but I'm reliant on you as the user to go register an MFA token and get a one-time code, whether that's SMS or app-based or whatever it is after the fact." Maybe they're using a YubiKey, which is stronger than way stronger than an SMS, et cetera. But it's still reliant on the user to pair and sync those MFA things there. So then when the administrators have to attest on whether that's a cyber insurance policy application or whatever else it is, it's hard to herd the cats, let's say, to make sure that you're actually enforcing MFA on all the critical assets for all the critical users, right? Where if you have a platform that can make MFA native, where it's not an option, it's deployed and turned on by the administrator, not the user, then you can, you have a much better posture of saying, yeah, we're using MFA on all of these applications, guaranteed. It's just on. There's no way around it. There's no way to bypass it. And we're starting to see language change, whether that's in federal regulation or in cyber insurance policy applications, et cetera, where they are starting to define beyond 2FA, MFA, and now you're seeing language actually listing phishing resistant MFA, because you've got to move away from the user being phished into sharing that, right?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Heath, I want to, cybersecurity is a super crowded field. Well, what
Mm-hmm.
makes TraitWare's approach different from other solutions out there?
Well, so cybersecurity as a whole requires lots of different pieces, right?
Sure.
We are specifically focused on your identity access controls, particularly multi-factor authentication, which happens to be the number one attack vector, right? So we think that if you're going to start somewhere in trying to address risk, you should start with enforcing strong phishing resistant MFA on as many applications as possible, and you are going to drastically reduce your risk posture. This doesn't mean that you don't need to also be doing, endpoint management, right? And making sure things are updated and patched and all of those things. You need to implement all of those. And in fact, cyber insurance, I've mentioned a couple of times, which we don't sell. We partner with some insurance companies that have approved our technology. But whether it's federal regulation or cyber insurance, or there's lots of control compliance policy organizations out there. There's typically like 7 critical controls that you need to put in place. And strong MFA is one of those 7 controls, right? So even though the space is crowded, for small businesses, MSPs that are managing even up to mid-tier businesses, medium-sized enterprise businesses, you need to focus on what's critical, where's my sensitive data, and what controls can I put in place to get started reducing risk. And we strongly believe identity controls is one of those first places that you should start, and then making sure you're running current software that's backed up, updated, all of those things.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, I want to turn and go talk about we've seen some high profile breaches linked to a group called Scattered Spider. For
Mm-hmm.
anyone who hasn't been following the headlines, what is Scattered Spider and why are they such a serious threat?
So it's a conglomeration of threat actors. It could be all the way up to like state sponsored, right, from nation states and those kinds of things, and depending on the type of target they're going at. The problem is that it's a network, right, and then once they build tools and strategies, they'll then sell those, right, for to other people to use, etc. And so Scattered Spider has just gotten really good at scraping information and then using that information to strategically target administrators or key personnel inside of a company, a CEO of a company, etc., for what we would call as like a spear phishing attack, not just a broad phishing attack, but really strategically with using knowledge that they've gained, and now with AI tools, they can really kind of put a very good profile together of you and your connections, and then figure out how to leverage those connections into tricking you into signing into something that you're maybe not in control of, right? And so this is where they're taking advantage of legacy systems, legacy access controls that are phishable, and then capturing those credentials somewhere in the middle of that process, right? Whether that's through, an attack that's been ongoing for a while. There's Evil Jinx proxy attack is a specific type of tool that can try to steal a session. After asking you to log in, they can even try to capture your MFA code that way. And so, looking at zero trust principles where you can segment your identity and MFA and how it delivers that to the service that you're trying to sign into, and then just moving people to systems where it makes it easier for them to recognize, like, oh, well, if I don't have a password and this tool is asking me to put a password in, maybe it's not really my system, right? And so, giving people, reducing the friction and frustration for them gives them the bandwidth to maybe be more alert and be less likely to be tricked into being phished by a group like Scattered Spider.
So really, it's just social engineering at its best, is how Scattered Spider is gaining traction.
It is social engineering, but it's being compounded by very good tools these days, right? So as we use, well, just like anything, right? So when fire was first created and the caveman discovered, oh, hey, I got fire, I can stay warm, or I could cook a meal, and it can do so much good for the world, right? But at the
Mhm.
same point, fire can also be massively destructive, right? And just wipe out entire towns in forest land or whatever. AI is basically the same thing. It can be used for so much good and create more efficiencies, but it can also be used incorrectly and maliciously. And it is empowering people, unfortunately, threat actors that maybe don't have the skill set to do a really good social engineering attack. The tools are empowering them to do that attack very efficiently because the tools are better. Does that make
Gotcha.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a minute about eliminating shareable secrets. We mentioned that earlier in this live stream. What exactly do you mean by shareable secrets, and why is eliminating them now critical for every organization, in your opinion?
So, because of attacks like we just discussed with Scattered Spider, if your access control is, so a password is a secret and only you should know it, right?
Mhm.
However, as humans, we're notorious for sharing them. And you could look at this as simple as, like, oh, I gave my sister my Netflix account, right? Or whatever else.
Right.
It's because the secret to log into that account is shareable. So that's a very simple example of a shareable secret being misused. In fact, Netflix really frowns upon that now and doesn't want you to share your account. And they're trying to make it more difficult to share your account on the back end rather than just addressing it on the front end. If they eliminated passwords and moved to a non-shareable secret, you couldn't loan it out. If you have to be in front of the screen that you're signing into, um, and you can't loan that out, like, you physically got to be there, you drastically reduce the chance that someone could share it. So a non-shareable secret would be something like a biometric or a behavioral biometric or a hardware-based token. So for TraitWare, we use a mobile device because we all carry one anyway, and
Sure.
we turn that into a very secure key, and that key is registered to an out-of-band server, and the key itself has to authenticate to the server before the server can release the identity payload to the relying party, which could be Zoom, could be your email platform, whether that's Google or Microsoft or whatever other applications you're using. Again, using those standards to sign into. But in doing that, we remove the password entirely, and we remove a temporary knowledge factor. So if any of the factors at any given point, if the user has to know them and has to manually enter them at some point or stuff them from their browser, then they um, are shareable, right? And we need
Sure.
to move to factors that are invisible or transparent to the user so that they can't be shared on purpose or accidentally.
So, how does TraitWare's no shareable secrets approach directly address the tactics used in attacks like those from Scattered Spider?
So we, by moving to phishing resistant MFA or passwordless MFA is another way to
Sure.
say that. we remove the ability to share that secret on accident. So if you don't have to enter it, and through that zero trust framework of segmentation, of separating the key from the server and the relying party, the application from the server, in moving to tokenized identity payloads that are all invisible to the user, it kind of locks down that communication between each component. And we do have other things that we can add behind the scenes to add additional factors, such as we can leverage the GPS coordinates of your key to allow or disallow an authentication request, right? So your phone's got to be on site. So if a threat actor even was successful in taking over someone's mobile device, which is really difficult to do with TraitWare, but not impossible, nothing's impossible. That threat actor would then have to show up on site. So if we go back, so late last year, there was headline news of like MGM and Caesars casinos being attacked, right? And it had a major impact. Like people couldn't get into their rooms or check in or whatever, and the casino floor was down and no ATM machines and all these different things, right? That was a successful attack because of a, similar to Scatter Spider, social engineering spear phishing attack. They were able to successfully account takeover an administrator for their identity provider. And once they had that, then they could move in and then set up their own accounts and all of those things. So what in TraitWare's use case is that, so in that case, they captured that person's username and password and their temporary one-time passcode to get a valid session to get in. With TraitWare, even if they had successfully taken over the account, in this case, for what was taken over at MGM Caesars was a username and password. But let's say they trick an admin into resetting someone's mobile device for them. That threat actor, which is most likely not located in the United States, would have to go on site to actually use the token that they just captured before the token could be used, with one of the additional factors that we can add. We've also built a browser extension that creates a trusted browser session between the server and the browser, so that identity payload that's returning from the server to the relying party, whether that's Zoom or Microsoft or whatever else it is, right? Any SSO application, can only be delivered to that trusted browser, right? Pre-registered browser. So there's no way to get in the middle of it. So it prevents that like evil Jinx proxy attack, those kinds of things. And so we're using, lots of known standards like PKI, signing with the nonce, all these things to really secure the communication between each one of those parties, right? The server, the relying party, the user, the token, all of these things. and we're doing all of that in milliseconds where, you've done this, you use TraitWare. Sure. You can literally pick up your phone, you scan a QR code and you're done. So in 2 touches and in milliseconds, you've signed into an application and you didn't enter anything, right? You just used your face to unlock the app, and then you used the key to then unlock the one-time passcode that's hidden inside of the QR code. And then the server released the identity over to what you were trying to sign into. And that all happens in milliseconds. And yet you didn't know any of the secrets to then do that process, right?
It's very simple. Very simple.
Very simple.
Yeah. Well, speaking of simplicity, let's talk about usability and simplicity. Some organizations worry that stronger authentication means more complexity for users. How does TraitWare keep the process secure without making it harder for legitimate users?
Yeah, so it's actually just what we just described, right? So we viewed it as, in today's world, it is extremely rare for someone not to have a mobile device, a smartphone, et cetera, these days. So we said, well, if you're already carrying that, and there's lots of other studies out there that prove that, I think over 90% of the population is no more than 3 feet away from their phone at any given time during the day, right? And so those aren't our stats. That's just, people can go look that up. So we said, well, if we're already carrying this, why don't we figure out how to use that as a key? And how do we make that key very robust and strong and secure? And so part of TraitWare's patented process is the way that you interact with your mobile device is extremely unique to you with subtle things. And it really doesn't have to do with any kind of non-public PII, right? So we're not looking at anything that would jeopardize your identity, but just your kind of behavior and the way you use your phone. And there's lots of different things that can be looked at. So we actually deploy a mathematical algorithm to your mobile device when you install the TraitWare app that generates this mathematical representation of you. It's just a bunch of numbers. We then separate that math from the mobile device to our server. And every time you authenticate to TraitWare, you first use your biometric, whether that's your Face ID on an iOS phone or a fingerprint on an Android phone, to unlock the app. Once the app's unlocked, then the app itself verifies that math that we've created between the mobile device and the authentication server and checks to make sure that it's the same within a very small allowable percentage, meaning we know that that is going to evolve and change over time. So instead of a user having to change the password every 30 days or 90 days or 6 months or whatever it is, we felt that the technology should do that. It should rotate the key, right? It should be dynamic. So this math that we look at, we know is changing over time. We allow it to change a small percentage. And the reason we allow it to change a small percentage is if a user was to get malware or something on their mobile device, that malware would most likely change that math greater than our allowable percentage. And we would know that there's an issue and say, hey, this is broken. We should check on that. What changed that was greater than this? And because you have to think about it, we're checking it every time you use the app, which could be once a day, could be twice a day, could be 10 times a day. Every time you're using it, we're checking that math. And then we're looking at, okay, well, it changed only 2%. This was a loud change. We then use that 2% change to update the math. So like a user changing a password, we just changed the math. We rotated the key with every login request to verify that the key is secure. Then once we know that the key is secure, we can then release that identity payload from the server to the relying party. And that was very technical, but the user in simplicity picks up their phone, looks at it with their face, scans a QR code, and they're done. That's it.
Well, let's go back to simplicity. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, as you just alluded to with TraitWare. But why is keeping authentication simple such a big part of actually making security work in the real world?
Because if it's not simple, users are more prone to making mistakes. And if it's not simple, not only are they more prone to making mistakes, they are drastic. We like to be efficient, which means we're lazy in other terms. And I'm sure you've come across this running your MSP, that if you make it difficult, users will find a way around it. They will try to go around it, or they'll make it so that they don't have to do it again. They just leave it on all the time, right? So a reason that making it simple for the user and easy to do and happens in seconds is that way they'll actually use the security. If you make the security difficult, they'll go around it.
I got you. Well, Heath, I know we're wrapping it up here, but I wanted to ask you a couple of takeaways for business leaders. If you could give companies one piece of advice to defend against these human targeted attacks, what would it be?
Start somewhere and don't assume that it won't happen to you or the companies that you're taking care of.
Gotcha. Well, in your view, what does an unphishable identity security posture look like in 2025 and beyond?
Moving to, as we already discussed on the call earlier, it's moving to, authentication that is phishing resistant, meaning it's device bound. It's looking at multiple factors to authenticate not only the user, but the key itself, and completely eliminating passwords, period. And that means you can't have a fallback to a password. If the fallback, I can have this passwordless experience over here, but If that's not working for some reason, then I can still use a password. Then you didn't eliminate the password. You will always only be as strong as your weakest link. And so you've got, to look at recovery, fallbacks, what is the default setting? If it's a password, you didn't fix the problem.
There you go. Well, looking into the future, 2026 and beyond, what does it look like for TraitWare? What's on the horizons?
So we've had, as you know, and you've been using our system for a while now. We've had workforce identity in production for a while. We're always continuing to evolve and improve that, particularly on the administrative side. We've got some exciting new automation coming out that's going to make it even easier or faster to deploy. So not only are we focused on making it simple for the user, but we're focused on simplifying life for the administrator, right? The one that's got to turn this on and deploy it. And beyond that, we've actually got some exciting things coming out where our system was built to also be able to be used by OEMs.
Nice.
Meaning if you are a big service provider out there and you're recognizing that your service provider login needs to improve, you can take our SDK, bake it into your existing solution, and you can take your service, your software that you've built and created, and move it to the future of authentication already, just licensing our SDK, and you're off to the races.
Sounds awesome. Well, Heath, it's always a pleasure having you on. I really appreciate your time today and educating everyone on, the uses of TraitWare, why using a product like TraitWare is so important in today's cybersecurity landscape. Thank you so much, and we'll have to do this again.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Great to be here, Scott.
Awesome. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.